In this software engineering playlist, we've already looked at the waterfall model, and I'm going to compare this with the agile model for developing software systems. I will start off by reminding you of the waterfall model. This is where we have various phases, and the first phase is requirements analysis. This is where a software house will send people called analysts to interview the customer, the stakeholder, to find out what it is they want the system to do. And during the analysis phase, documentation will be created. Now, the documentation produced will depend upon the methodology chosen by the software house. And this is something I will be looking at in due course. But when the analysts have finished, they will pass their documentation onto the designers. So the next phase of the software lifecycle is the design. And this is where designers will make decisions on how to decompose the solution on how the software will be built. And again, they will be producing documentation to reflect the design, something that the coders, the programmers, will be able to work from. The next phase is the implementation phase, or if you prefer, the coding phase. This is where the programmers write the code, guided by the design documents produced during the design phase of the software lifecycle. The next phase in the software lifecycle is testing, and this is where the program code that's being produced is tested to see that it works as expected. Once the software is tested and everybody's satisfied that it works as it should do, then the software is deployed. In other words, it's given to the customers, the stakeholders, and we are moving now into the maintenance phase, where we have to ensure that the software continues to work correctly throughout its lifetime of use. The waterfall model is suggesting that every phase is started and finished before you go on to the next phase. So if we consider the requirements analysis phase, the model maybe is suggesting that you do all of the requirements until you've gathered them all. And when you've done that, you pass the documentation you've produced onto the designers. And the assumption is that the requirements have finished. The designers then take these requirements, they produce the design documents, and when all the design documents are finished, they pass them on to the implementation phase, where the coders work with the finished design documentation to write the code. When the code is finished, in other words, when the whole system has been coded up, the testing phase is entered, and you test the entire system to see that it works as it should. And then when you've got it working, you move on to the maintenance phase. A major drawback to the waterfall model is the assumption that when you have finished the requirements analysis phase, you will have gathered all of the requirements for the proposed software system. In reality, you will not have done this, because the development process itself will keep on throwing up things that the customer, the stakeholder, wants. And the software team themselves will say, well, shouldn't they want this as well? So you will find that up to, typically, for large projects, 40% of the requirements are missed during the requirements analysis phase. And we've covered this earlier in the playlist when I talked about the problem of creeping requirements. We will require the developers to be able to take account of the creeping requirements that will inevitably appear during the development of the software system. The problem with the waterfall model is that it is too rigid to enable it to deal with the inevitable creeping requirements that you will find during the development of any software system. What we need is an approach to software development that can take account of the inevitable creeping requirements that will appear during the development of the software system. The next video in the playlist will look at a suitable model that takes into account the inevitable appearance of creeping requirements. And that model is referred to as the agile model of software development, the agile software lifecycle. Ultimately, if you know there are going to be creeping requirements that appear during the development of a software system, it's best to plan for it. And the waterfall model isn't the best approach to the development of software for taking into account creeping requirements, whereas the agile model, we will find, is better at dealing with creeping requirements. And I'll cover this in the next video, in the sense I'll show you what the agile approach to software development actually means. With respect to the various phases that you would expect to see in a software lifecycle, you will find that the agile model still has requirements analysis, design, implementation, testing, and maintenance, but it goes about doing all of these phases differently. And I'll outline how that happens in the next video.